You need to hear about a search and rescue tracker deep in the Appalachian Mountains who followed a missing hiker's trail straight to the gates of an abandoned 1930s hospital and watched his own tracking hounds refuse to cross the tree line. May 16, 2016. Great Smoky Mountains, North Carolina/Tennessee border. Grady Holt, 9 years a SAR tracker, 60 minutes from a mandatory grid pullout as storm cells build over the ridge. Two things go wrong in the same 90 seconds, and neither has an explanation that fits inside a training manual. This is Grady's story. Grady hit the switchbacks at a dead run, legs already burning, rhododendron branches raking his forearms, radio hissing against his chest. Dispatch had given him the cutoff 12 minutes ago. Grid evacuation by 5:15. No exceptions. Static cracked through his earpiece. The recorded loop of the missing hiker's last transmission replayed for the third time that hour. Something's wrong with the dead air swallowed the rest. Grady had heard that fragment so many times, it had stopped sounding like words. 16-year-old Tyler Cobb had said it. Then his phone died somewhere above the fourth switchback, and nobody had heard from him since. His mother was still parked at the trailhead, refusing to leave. Deb Marsh's voice cut in sharp and breathless, her boots pounding gravel on a ridge line 25 minutes behind him. "Grady, do not go past the scent cone alone. Wait for me." He didn't answer. 25 minutes was 25 minutes Tyler didn't have, and Grady was the only tracker inside the closing perimeter who could still reach the last known trail marker before the storm sealed the grid for good. Deb knew exactly why that mattered to him. She'd been on the radio 3 years ago, too, the last time Grady followed a scent cone into this exact gorge and came out alone. He wasn't planning on making that same call twice in one lifetime. Birch hit the trail at 4:09, 6 minutes before Grady would learn this was the last clean marker anyone was ever going to find. The hound's whole body went rigid, lead snapping taut in Grady's fist, the leather-worn glass smooth from 9 years of exactly this. Grady's compass housing, cracked since a fall 2 winters back, swung loose against his knuckles as he crouched to read the ground. Wood thrush calls should have been thick this close to dusk. Grady used them without thinking, the way every tracker on this ridge did, judging how close he was to another moving body by how far out the alarm calls scattered. Tonight there weren't any. Not silence exactly, an absence he didn't have 2 seconds to notice. Thunder rolled somewhere close, closer than it should have been, given how far off the storm still looked. He had 40 minutes now, and a dog that wouldn't stop pulling toward a tree line that, according to the topo map in his vest pocket, shouldn't have had anything behind it but empty slope. It did. Rusted chain link rose out of the brush ahead, sagging under decades of kudzu, and past it, swallowed almost completely by pines grown wild and unchecked for 30 years, the black outline of a roofline. Grady stopped running. Birch didn't. The hound surged forward another 10 feet, hit the fence line, and stopped dead. Every hair on his spine standing straight up, a low sound building in his throat that Grady had never once heard him make in 9 years of working together. Grady reached out and closed his hand around the top rail of the fence. It was warm. Birch bucked backward off the fence so hard the lead tore straight out of Grady's hand. The second hound, Copper, didn't even make it that far. She'd already spun and bolted downslope back the way they'd come, and by the time Grady turned to grab for her collar, both dogs were gone into the brush, yelping in a register he'd never heard from either dog in 9 years. He had 38 minutes. Grady stood at the fence alone, hand still stinging from the rope burn, and made the call he'd known he was going to make since Birch first hit the scent cone. He climbed. 9 years of protocol said don't enter uncleared structures solo, not with 2 hounds refusing the ground in front of you. He climbed anyway. Somewhere past that fence was a 16-year-old boy, and Grady had run out of people he was willing to wait on. The chain link gave under his boot with a groan of dry rust, and he came down hard on packed dirt on the other side, breath already ragged. That was when the pressure hit, a sudden ache blooming behind both eyes, like the inside of his skull had dropped elevation too fast. His ears popped, then popped again, and every sound on the mountain, footsteps, the far-off rumble of the storm, Deb's voice still crackling faint on the radio, dropped a full register, muffled like his head had been shoved underwater. He wiped his lip on the back of his wrist and his hand came away red before he'd even registered any pain, which meant whatever had just happened to him had happened faster than the part of his brain that flinches had time to catch up. The gatepost was 6 feet to his left, half swallowed in kudzu, and bolted to it was a notice board so bleached by 3 decades of weather that Grady had to get within arm's reach to read it. Closed. 1987. Below the sign, someone had carved a row of notches into the wood, evenly spaced, each one cut the exact same depth as the last. Not weather damage, not rot. Deliberate, patient work, done with a steady hand over what looked like years. He filed it and moved on toward the scent cone, because 37 minutes was 37 minutes. That was when he saw the boot prints. Not Tyler's. Tyler had been wearing trail runners, size 10, tread pattern already logged from the trailhead cast Deb had pulled that morning. These were bigger, deeper, adult-sized and pressed into the mud with a weight and a rhythm that didn't belong to a scared 16-year-old stumbling through the dark. They moved with purpose, in a straight, unhurried line toward the black shape of the roofline through the pines, like whoever left them had walked this exact path more than once. Grady crouched over the nearest print and breathed in, out of habit as much as anything. Wet rust. Standing water that had been sitting in limestone too long, gone flat and mineral. And underneath both of those, something else. Organic. Old, gone slightly sweet the way meat goes sweet right before it turns. He straightened too fast, and his vision doubled for a second before it snapped back. 40 feet ahead, a rusted gurney lay tipped on its side in the weeds, one wheel still spinning. Grady froze. The wheel kept turning slower now, the only motion for 50 yards in every direction. There was no wind to catch it. There hadn't been wind for several minutes now, he realized. The branches around him hanging dead still. The storm noise from the ridge gone thin and distant, like someone had turned a dial down on the whole mountain and forgotten to tell him why. He made himself walk toward the gurney anyway. 36 minutes left, a boy somewhere ahead of him who hadn't left a print in 11 minutes, and a wheel that had no business still moving. Somewhere behind him, faint through the muffled ringing in his ears, Deb's voice cracked over the radio. 3 words, cut off almost as soon as they started, gone before he could make sense of a single one of them. Grady's vision split into 2 overlapping mountains, then snapped back together, then split again. He pushed through it anyway, boots crunching over collapsed roofing tile, following the boot prints instead of the boy's trail now. Because whoever left those prints had walked this exact ground enough times to know it better than any map Grady carried. 34 minutes. He needed 30 seconds. Just 30 seconds still enough to think clearly, get his bearings, radio Deb his position before the ringing in his ears swallowed her voice completely. He got maybe 5. The floor gave without warning. No groan of warping wood. No creak to brace against, just packed linoleum tile turning to open air under his right boot. He dropped through splintered subfloor and 10 feet of dark, one arm slamming the edge on the way down, and hit stone hard enough to hear the crack before he felt it. His leg had stopped sending pain signals, almost as fast as it had broken. And that, more than the fall itself, was the thing that told him something down here didn't want him fully conscious yet. He came to on his back, staring up through the hole he'd fallen through at a ragged circle of gray evening sky, already too far above him to reach. Cold limestone under his spine, grinding pressure every time his shattered leg shifted, a deep ache that flared white behind his eyes, and then, unnervingly, faded again before it should have. There was no sign of Tyler down here. No pack, no jacket, no second set of prints leading in or out of the pit. Just Grady alone, in a room somebody had clearly built for company. Fast. He got his good elbow under him and dragged himself upright against the cavern wall, breath tearing in and out. Hold. He stopped, listening, one hand pressed flat against cold rock. Slow. Nothing came. He let the breath out long and shaking and kept moving. A fire pit sat 6 feet away, kindling stacked in a tight, deliberate cone, unburned and ready. Beside it, folded in a row, animal pelts, deer, from the shape of them, maybe half a dozen. He'd remember later that they weren't old. They were still faintly damp, like someone had skinned them within the week and left them here to cure. This wasn't abandoned. Someone was keeping this space ready. Fast. His hand found the wall behind him for balance, palms scraping rough stone. Hold. His fingers caught on something that wasn't rock. Slow. He turned his head, slow enough that the movement didn't make the double vision worse, and looked. Stakes. A dozen of them, hand-carved, driven into the cavern floor in a loose perimeter around the fire pit, and cut into each one, at the exact same height, the exact same depth, was a single notch. Grady had spent 9 years reading marks other people left on the ground without meaning to. This wasn't that. This was the same notch from the gatepost, the same steady hand, the same patient spacing repeated a dozen times over what looked like decades of use. And then it landed, the way ground sign always landed for him. Not as a guess, but as certainty, arriving all at once. The boot prints hadn't been leading toward the boy by accident. They'd been laid across exactly the kind of ground a trained tracker trusts without a second thought. A clean, confident, purposeful trail, the sort you follow instead of second-guessing. That trust was the whole trap. Nobody untrained would have pushed this far on prints that clean. Whoever made them had known exactly what kind of person would be sent up this mountain after a missing kid, and had built the ground to fit him specifically. Fast, his pulse hammering. Hold, his hand still on the stake. Slow. The kindling in the fire pit, he realized, wasn't just stacked. It was stacked the way a person stacks a fire they intend to come back and light soon. 31 minutes left on a clock. Nobody down here could hear ticking but him. And somewhere above the hole in the ceiling, faint and getting fainter, Deb's voice was calling his name. Grady surfaced in pieces, first the smell, wood smoke, and under it something bitter, resinous, ground fine. Then the taste of copper thick at the back of his throat, blood he must have swallowed at some point without knowing it. Then the pressure on his leg, firm and sure, hands working something cold and gritty into torn skin exactly where the bone had snapped. He never saw the man's face, only ever the hands, and the hands already knew exactly where the break was before Grady had told anyone, even himself. The hands moved in a rhythm. A low muttering came with them, words Grady couldn't place, repeated in a pulse that felt wrong for a full second before he placed why. It was the same cadence as the storm static that had been chewing through his earpiece since 4 o'clock. The same clicks and drops, like the man had learned to talk that way from listening to a radio for longer than Grady had been alive. Fast. Grady's hand shot out and closed on a wrist thin as kindling, strong as wire. Hold. The hand stopped. Slow. They started again, unbothered, and kept working. 28 minutes meant nothing now. What mattered was the sound building somewhere below them, low and constant, growing instead of fading. Not thunder. Thunder didn't keep going. This was a single unbroken roar, climbing louder with every passing second, and Grady's stomach understood what it was, a full breath before his brain caught up. Water. The storm had broken over the ridge exactly on schedule, and somewhere close, a channel that had been dry when he fell was filling fast. The hands hooked under his arms and hauled, hard and sudden, dragging him backward across stone fast enough that his splinted legs screamed even through whatever had been packed into it. Grady twisted, got a look past the fire for the first time, and the whole shape of the last 2 hours rearranged itself in half a second. Chained tight to a support post 10 feet from the flames, wrists raw but otherwise whole, was Tyler Cobb. Alive, terrified and filthy, but alive. And staring past Grady toward the tunnel mouth where the roar was climbing into something you could feel in your teeth. Fast, water already licking the low entrance. Hold, one breath where nobody moved. Slow. The old man's grip didn't loosen, dragging Grady toward a shelf of rock at the back of the cavern. Not a hunter. A man alone, decades past the point where he could carry an injured, panicking teenager to high ground by himself. Smart enough to know exactly what kind of person the Forest Service would send after a missing hiker. Smart enough to lay a trail. A trained tracker would trust without question. Straight through a fall zone built to break a leg and leave a second set of working hands stranded down here with the boy he couldn't move alone. Every skill Grady had, the ground reading, the discipline, the refusal to wait for backup, had been the exact tool the old man needed. Not stolen, borrowed, without asking, at the worst possible moment. Grady finally understood what 9 years of training had actually walked him into. The mountain had used every ounce of his competence against him, and he'd never once seen the trap take shape. The water hit the low chamber floor in a wall, black and fast, swallowing the fire pit whole in under 4 seconds. The old man didn't stop moving. He got Grady's good arm looped over his shoulder, one hand still locked around Tyler's chained wrist, and hauled them both up the rock shelf as the flood tore through the space where all 3 of them had been standing. Fast. The stakes with the notches went under first, then the pelts, then the fire itself, hissing out in a single dying gasp of steam and ash. Hold. For 1 full second, all 3 of them balanced on 6 inches of dry ledge with black water surging past their boots, cold enough to numb Grady's good leg through the sole of his boot. Slow. It didn't rise any further. Grady's hand found the salve packed into his leg, gritty with something like pine resin, already going stiff. He'd carry the bruise from it for a week, long after there was anyone left to ask what was actually in it. He never got the man's face. Not in the firelight, not on the ledge, not in the 4 minutes it took the water to crest and start receding through the tunnel mouth. Only the hands working fast and sure in the dark, and the sound of that same broken radio muttering. Steady as a heartbeat, right up until the moment Grady's vision finally gave out for good. Grady woke 12 hours later under fluorescent light that hummed too evenly, a blood pressure cuff cinched tight on one arm and a fresh cast running from ankle to knee on the other leg. His sinuses ached in a way the ER doctor couldn't fully explain. A slow, dried trickle of blood he'd apparently been leaking on and off since sometime around 4 o'clock, with nothing on any scan to account for it. The cot next to his belonged to Tyler Cobb. The kid was pale, wrists bandaged, working through a cup of orange juice like it was the first thing he'd tasted in days. His mother sat in the chair beside him, refusing to let go of his hand even to sign the paperwork the nurse kept sliding across the tray table. Tyler told the story in pieces, the way people do when they're still deciding how much of it they believe themselves. An old man had pulled him out of the storm 2 days earlier, fed him, kept him chained more out of habit than cruelty, like he didn't trust the boy not to wander off and drown in the flood channel alone. Knew exactly how to move through that cavern in the dark, every ledge, every drop, like he'd been doing it his whole life. By the time the second rescue team reached the high chamber, there was no one there but the two of them. No prints leading out, no trace on the ridge, the fence line, or the collapsed wards above. Backup. SAR found both of them exactly where the flood had left them, 12 feet inside a perimeter that had been fully fenced and padlocked since 1987, with no gap anywhere in 3/4 of a mile of chain link that anyone could find. The notches on the gatepost made it into nobody's official report. Neither did the stakes in the cavern, or the fact that 12 of them matched the post's spacing down to the depth of the cut. Grady mentioned it once to the incident commander and watched the man write it down as decorative carving, unknown age, before moving on to the next line of the form. That was the detail that stayed with Grady longest, not the flood, not the fall, the notches, a dozen of them, cut by the same steady hand over what had to have been decades, and not one person in a position to explain them seemed interested in trying. His radio sat charging on the nightstand, still looping faint static on the emergency channel out of habit more than need. He found himself listening to it anyway, the same clicks and drops from the cavern. And for the first time in 9 years, the sound didn't register as noise. It had a rhythm to it now. He couldn't unhear it. His thumb found the bruise through the edge of his cast, gritty and raised, right where the salve had gone in. Deb showed up at visiting hours with 2 coffees and didn't ask a single question about the mountain. She just sat down, handed him one, and said she'd drive him home whenever he was ready. No rush. She wasn't going anywhere. Grady took her up on it. 9 years of driving back from these gorges alone, and this was the first time he let someone else take the wheel. He never did find out whose hands those were. Only that somewhere, decades deep in these mountains, someone was still keeping the fire ready, still watching the fence line for the next tracker good enough to find it.